This is the recording of some of the examples in chapter 3, I think it is, what we're on right now, querying a single database. So let's go ahead and jump in. I've got MySQL Workbench open here, and I'm going to open up a new SQL tab here. Hopefully you can see this okay. Yeah, it looks like it's a decent size, so hopefully it'll come through on the recording. So the simplest example that we've got, and you already know this, we've been doing this one forever, is to do a simple select. But right away, you might run into some issues here. So let's go ahead and do a select. And let's see, am I allowed to, yeah, let's make this a bit bigger here. So I'll do a select all, the splat selector, and then the clause from, and then invoices is the name of the table. So there's like invoices, there's vendors, I think there's, well, those are the two examples that I've seen so far. I'm not sure if there are other tables in there or not. Let's take a quick look here. It's in AP and tables, and yeah, okay, so we've got invoice archives, we've got vendor contacts, we've got a few of them. So anyway, we're going to use invoices and just vendors for right now. And the way that you do this in MySQL Workbench is you do a command, or rather a query, and then you end it with a semicolon. If you have just one query, it doesn't actually need one, but if you have multiple queries on the page, you do need these semicolons at the end of each one. And that's the way we're going to be doing it. We're going to have multiple queries on a single tab here, and then when you're done, you'll save that as an SQL file to submit to me so I can check it over. And the way that you get each individual SQL to run individually of the others on the page is to do Control Enter. So I've got this one query, and I've got the cursor on that line, and I do Control Enter, and this will either run or it won't, depending on whether or not there's a problem. Right now there's a problem. I'm seeing the little red X. Everybody knows what that means. And this says no database selected. So if I tap on this guy over here to select it, and I go back over here and hit Control Enter, and it still doesn't like it. So here's what, there's a couple of ways to fix this. One of them is to add the name of the database with a dot separator before the name of the table. So the name of the database is AP. So if I do ap.invoices and do Control Enter, then it gives me a result here. It's giving me however many hundreds of results in this set here, or dozens, however many there are. But see, we'd have to do that every single time, and you probably don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. I would forget. So here's something else that you can do. So I'm going to take this off, and notice that once again, it does not work. And up above, it could be anywhere actually, but let's go ahead and put it up at the top here. We're going to use the use clause. Use AP. So use and then the name of the database, and then once again hit Control Enter, and 0 was affected, but now it should be accessing like all of the rest of the commands we do on this text field here, the text area should then know that they're querying that database. So go to select all from invoices again, and once again do the Control Enter, and this time we get the result back. Yeah, so let's see. So that's the simplest case, is just doing a simple select. And expand this out a little bit. Make sure that's still recording okay. Yeah. Okay, cool. So we've done that, and I'm just going to do some other examples from the textbook and maybe a few variations of my own. So the first thing to know about is the where clause, so that you can grab only some results instead of all results. This is definitely going to be important in the project that we've talked about, right? Because we're going to have a database table that's full of thousands of card entries, and we're certainly not going to want to grab all of them all the time, or like ever. We're probably just going to want to grab one or two or a few or something like that. So the where clause, I'm going to hit Enter a couple of times. If I don't hit Control Enter, then it doesn't run that query again, and I can just make a new query down here. So again, this is the way I want you to do yours when you do the exercises from the book or what have you. So let's go ahead and do this here. So I'm going to do a select all from invoices. I know that it's recommended that every clause goes on its own line, And if you follow that, then this is a different clause. It would go onto its own line. I personally think if it's really short like this, then it's okay to have it on one line, personally. But if you want to be super consistent about it, then you can do it the other way, of course. So the where clause, let's say from invoices, let's see, no, invoice ID, I think is the column. There it is, invoice ID. And we can specify that it is one particular number. So the one that I kind of singled out beforehand is where invoice ID equals 106. Do Control Enter, and now it just returns the one value, and that's it. So invoice ID 106, and then we get the rest of the stuff just for that one entry in the table. So that's probably the single most important clause other than select itself when you're retrieving information from the database. By the way, notice what MySQL Workbench does underneath that. There's actually a second row, it looks like, entered here with all null values. It's actually not another result. That's there in case we want to insert a new row with new values, then we can do it there. So that's what that thing's all about. Okay, let's do another one. You can totally copy and paste if you want, of course, but I'm going to just type these out real quick, unless I start getting into a lot of trouble. I'm still getting used to this keyboard. Invoices, and we'll do where. Notice, again, the capitalization of the clauses. It's not required. You could do it lowercase, but look how much, even without the color coding, I mean, look how much easier it makes this to read if all the clauses are done in uppercase and then all like the data names and identifiers and so on are done lowercase. It just makes things super easy to read. So let's go ahead and do where invoice ID is less than or equal to 5. Okay, so we only want to return 5 results from here. And do the Control Enter. And, oh, I did greater than or equal to 5. I always do that. I always get the wrong one in there, like constantly. Let's try this one instead. This will do a little bit better. So not Shift Return, but Control Return. And then we get just the 5 results and then that null row at the end there. Of course, there's another way to do this, and you may already be aware of it. If I do select all from invoices, and then instead of doing a where, I just do a limit. Limit 5. And then run that, I get exactly the same result set here. So where invoice ID is less than or equal to 5 does exactly the same thing as limit 5. So normally you do this one instead. The textbook also does an example with dates, which I think is kind of cool. Let's see, let's go ahead and do select. Now, if we want to do something other than just selecting everything, we can select certain columns here. So let's just say we want to get invoice number and invoice date, and that's it. So we just go ahead and type those out. So invoice number, invoice date, and separated by a comma, and that's it. And then we do from invoices. So I think, notice that I now am putting this from on the other line. I think anything longer than just this very basic where you're just grabbing everything, it's time to start splitting up the clauses onto multiple lines there. And then we do like, so invoice date. And so we want to just grab everything. These look like they're 2018 and so on dates. So let's grab everything from the month of April in 2018. So it's the between clause that they use here. And you put the date in quotes. So it's 2018, let's see, 04-01, April Fool's Day, and clause. I like how MySQL Workbench, if I do a misspelling, it doesn't give me the color coding anymore, which is good. That's just the way I want it. 2018, 04, how many days does April have in it? 30. Got to run through that little rhyme in my head. Okay, so where invoice date between April 1st and April 30th, semicolon, and hit Control Enter. And we're getting this time, so two things. This, instead of getting everything, we're just getting the invoice number and the invoice date. And that's it. And it's also only those things that happened in the month of April in 2018. So that's cool. They're not ordered in any particular thing. They're not ordered by date or anything like here. So we can also do an order by in here. I suppose I should be starting a new one for each one of these, but I think you get the idea. So we'll do another one here. We'll do order by 2 words. I always want to put an underscore between these things, but the clauses are all separated by spaces in SQL. So let's see, we'll just order by invoice date. And then it gets these in order. So there's the 8th, 10th, 13th, 16th, 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 21st, and so on. And then let's see, let's do more orders. Let's do another order by. Because you can do ordering by ascending or descending in SQL. So let's see, I will do, I think this is another example from the textbook. Let's say I do, I don't know, I'll just do invoice number and invoice total from invoices. And let's do an order by invoice total. And let's start with descending, which is DESC for descending. And it gives just those 2 columns again, the number and the total. And the total is by descending, so it starts with the highest number, the highest total. Our best paying customer is right up front there. And then it goes on down from here until we get down to like some poor chap who only spent $6 with us. And then, as you might expect, the opposite of that is ascending, ASC. And it'll do the opposite. It starts with the poor schmucks who got $6, and then our best paying customers are all down at the bottom. So that is order by. Pretty simple stuff, right? I mean, I think SQL, like the general SQL syntax is really, really straightforward compared to procedural programming and so on. Let's do a couple other things. Aliases are important. It goes into that in the textbook chapter as well. So I will make a new query for this one. And this is where you use the as clause in order to grab a column and name it something else. Or, as we'll see, grab multiple columns and mix them together in different ways and give the result its own new name within the set result, or the result set rather. So I'll do, these are all select, so they all start the same way. And I'll just do a real simple one here. Invoice, and actually, yeah, this one's straight from the textbook as well. Pretty close to it anyway. Invoice number. You might think, like, yeah, I'm tired of typing invoice all the time with those underscores and everything, and this is just getting kind of difficult to type all over again. I'm getting finger fatigue. So maybe I want to return this as this thing. Now I put quotes around it. You can use singles or doubles, and the quotes aren't even necessary unless you've got a space in here, and this one name does have a space, so it does have the quotes. This one I'm going to break up to the previous ones where we're grabbing multiple columns. It's just on one line here, it's fine, but as soon as I start feeling like the line length is going to start getting out of control, then I start breaking this up onto multiple lines too. I think it just makes it easier to read and to handle and so on. Simpler ones, so this one does not require the quotes. And what else are we getting? Invoice total as total. And then we still have to tell where we're grabbing this from, so from invoices. And then check out the result set down here, and it has our new names here. So instead of invoice number with lowercase and the underscore, it's got the new 2-word name, and then this one's just called date, and then this one's just called total. So those can be handy sometimes, especially when you start using expressions to mix and match, different columns together in different ways. So let's go ahead and do one of those here. And it's going to be select, I'm going to do invoice ID. It's helpful to have like either the invoice ID or the invoice name or something like that right at the beginning, just so you can see what each one is, I suppose. So we're going to grab the payment total and the credit total and call this total credits between the two of them. We're going to add them together. So payment total, so this would be the amount that someone has just paid. And then credit total is the amount that they've paid in the past beyond what they've purchased, right? And then we're going to use an expression to create another column here from those two columns. So payment total plus credit total equals, oh, not equals, see what I want to do there? Let's do as instead, total credits. Or, I mean, with our new naming here, let's go ahead and do this. And then we still have to tell where we want to get it from. So this is from invoices. And if we run that, and now check out our columns here. So we've got the invoice ID, payment total, credit total, and then we've got the new column that we've given the alias total credits for. And what it's doing is it's adding these two guys together. And you can't really see it at the beginning because a lot of these are zeros for the credit total, but I believe down at the bottom we've got some where someone has actually got some credits here, and like this one, it's adding $21,000. That's a big payment with a couple $1,000s credit, and then it adds up to the 23 grand down here. So it's adding those guys together. It's doing a mathematical expression in order to generate another column with an alias that we just added. So let me see how we're doing here. We're about at 16 minutes, so I won't do an. There's another example where it does an arithmetic expression using as, where it takes the invoice total minus payment total minus credit total and creates an alias for a new column from those called balance due. That one's more useful, right, because you can see what somebody still owes, if anything. And so yeah, but that's another example from the textbook. I'll go ahead and stop this from here, and let's go ahead and do the concat function. So we just did the add, and as a longtime JavaScript developer, you know, loosey-goosey, untyped a procedural language, I want to be able to use plus for both, you know, addition and concatenation. But of course, it doesn't work that way in SQL. So if we want to do a concat here, there's a couple of examples. Well, I'll do the example from the book first. So I'll do, let's see, select, and this is going to be vendor name. And then we're going to concatenate some of the address together. So there is, and this one is actually a function. So it's like a method, right? It's got the function name followed by the parentheses. You're well used to seeing that from C-based languages. So let's go ahead and we'll get the vendor city, the vendor state, and the vendor zip code in there. And then we'll have to do some strings interspersed between them. So let's see, what is this? It's vendor city, and then vendor state, and then vendor zip code. I'm already wishing that I put this on multiple lines instead of one. I'll probably break it up in a moment. And from vendors. And notice, okay, so this is actually good. Notice what happened where if we do not give this an alias, it just gives the function in its entirety as the name of the column. So it actually makes a lot more sense to go ahead and give this an alias instead of having to deal with that monstrosity, and we'll just call this as address. There we go. That's a little bit easier to do. So notice what's going on here, as you might expect if you've done concatenation before, like it just rams it all together into one string without any spaces or anything. So let me go ahead and split this up onto multiple lines. It's only a few things, but it's about to be more. So if we want to put like a comma space in between here, then we have to go ahead and do that. And then this one's just going to get a space, I believe. There we go. Now it looks a little better. Madison, Wisconsin, and then it's got the zip code in there. And there's another example that has to do with coalesce clause. And it's, Yeah, let's go ahead and do this. Okay, so I was going to skip this, but let's go ahead and do this because sometimes if you're just playing around with databases that have null values, this can lead to problems that you may not know how to deal with at first. So let's go ahead and do something similar to that. I'm going to do select, and what do we want here? So we want vendor name, and then we also want vendor. And actually, you know what? We need to concat this. I don't even know what I'm doing here. We got to, okay, it's not the vendor name. Okay, so we'll do the concat here, right? There we go. So vendor address 1 and vendor address 2. Right, like 2 lines of an address. And because we already know what this is going to be, we got to go ahead and put in a comma in between those two, a comma and space between those two. And then let's tell it where we want it from. So this is going to be from vendors. And let's give it a try here. So what it's doing, and I forgot to do the as thing again, so let's go ahead and fix that before we look at anything else. We'll do as address again. There we go. So we got the vendor name and address here. Look what's happening. A lot of these values are returning null. In fact, a lot of them. So someone might be looking through this result set going, well, this is not very useful. So basically what's happening in this is when you get a result, if you're doing concatenation, if there is a null value anywhere in there, then MySQL returns a null value for an all, which I personally think I don't like that. I think if there's nothing there when you're concatenating, it should just skip it and go on to the next thing. But a lot of these have vendor address 2 null, and some of them have vendor address 1 null, and so those are all adding up to be, I think most of the results wind up with a null value, which is not very useful. So what you do in that case, if you think one of these values might be null, and let's go ahead and check it so you can see what the heck we're talking about. I'm just going to do the select all from, actually I don't have a select all from vendors. Let's go ahead and do one down here, just a very simple one so we can see it. Vendors. So this is what I'm talking about, like the second entry has null for vendor address 2, and a lot of them are going to. Like when I have to fill a form online, I'm not in an apartment number anymore, so I always leave this blank. So there's going to be a lot of them that are blank like that, and some of them have the first value that's blank. Apparently, the Internal Revenue Service doesn't want you to get in touch with them at all. No, I'm just kidding. I know I've sent stuff to them directly, and it really is just IRS, and then you jump to Fresno, California. It doesn't have a street address. So here's what you do for these guys. Let's see. Yeah, it's this guy right here. So no, it's this one down here. When we have vendor address 1. So if I think vendor address 1, some of them might be null, I can tell it to say, okay, take any null value and replace it with an empty string instead. And so this is going to be the coalesce. I don't think the chapter does not go into coalesce as far as I recall, by the way. So coalesce vendor address 1, and then give it an empty string. So this is another function, right? And we're going to do the same thing for vendor address 2. We'll do coalesce clause. And replace any null value with an empty string. And then I have to add another closing parenthesis, right? Because if this one's closing this one, there's still this open one all the way back from the concat function way up there. And so now when I hit control return or control enter, now they're not showing up as null values anymore. Now, it does lead to some weird things, like the Internal Revenue Service now has an address of comma. Okay, so there's more work that would probably need to be done with whatever business logic you've got that's grabbing information from the database. But it's a start, at least. At least we're not getting all these null values anymore. Pacific Bell apparently does not have a street address either. So yeah, that's it. So that's it. That's what I've got for this one. It's a pretty straightforward chapter, I think, except that, again, it doesn't have the coalesce stuff. And one or two other things in here might not be in there as well. I'm not sure. But some of these examples come right out of the textbook chapter. So a final time, this is the way I want you to do it when you turn in the exercises from the end of chapter 3 and current chapters. Don't just replace what you do. Make a a tab with multiple queries so that each exercise is its own query, and they're separated by the semicolons. And then you can go ahead and save this. So I would probably call this recording, not in capitals, recording chapter 3 or something like that. And it'll save it as an SQL file. You probably don't want to put it into the DB setup here, but you can put it into, I'll just put it into the root folder here. Well, I won't do that. I'll make a recordings folder and put it into there. But that's what you want. You want to export the SQL file, and then that'll be what I ask you to submit whenever you're doing exercises from the chapter, as well as some other things that we might do in the class. I'll just go ahead and save it in here for now. Okay, I think that's it.